I'm just taking a quick break from playing some Zelda to give this talk. I don't know if you've played the new Zelda, but it has completely taken over my life. I could literally and might talk about this game all day, but for some reason nobody's accepting my conference talk proposals about pro tips for Zelda Breath of the Wild. So I'm going to go a little fast, so y'all have to keep up with me. My name is Brandon Hayes. I run an engineering team for a startup in Austin called Ojo Labs. We're building an AI assistant platform for real estate agents, and it's pretty fun. I'm excited for Randall's talk so I can learn what I actually do. I want to thank Ojo for letting me take the time to come talk about some stuff with you. Before we get started, a little bit of a non sequitur. I have something to share. It's 100% unrelated to the talk, but I cannot get this out of my head. The developer for Fighting Baseball for the Super Nintendo had to come up with like 20 American-sounding names, and on first glance, they look legit. And then you look a little closer. I'm trying to figure out whether I like Mario McLuane or Bobson Dugnut better. And I thought this would be a really fun Markov chain generator, but I didn't write it. So one warning for this talk, if this is you, you're gonna have a bad time. So I'm grateful to be here, but I gotta come clean. I love Ruby and Rails down into my bones, but I haven't done a lot of it in a long time. I don't really program a ton these days. I'm doing more management, ops with Kubernetes, some Elixir, a lot of JavaScript. So that doesn't mean I don't love Ruby. In fact, along those lines, I want to tell some stories that highlight two kinds of alignment that can guide your decisions and potentially save you a bunch of frustration that I've experienced over the recent past. First is tactical alignment, or tactical fit. When you and your tools and your environment are all tactically aligned, you know you're set up for short-term success. The tools you use match the set of problems in front of you. An example of this would be using a tool that's good at talking to a database for building CRUD apps. Second is philosophical alignment, or philosophical fit. When you, your tools, and your environment are philosophically aligned, you're set up to further your own purpose and your longer-term goals and desires. A couple of examples would be using tooling that makes it simpler to follow test-driven development, if that's your philosophy, or working on a team that values high-quality documentation, if that's your thing. When your environment or tools don't match your own personal philosophy, or they're not set up to help you achieve your tactical goals, you're set up to swim upstream. You will absolutely at some point be confronted with situations where you realize that you're swimming upstream, and this leads to some serious pain. Maybe your core philosophy isn't shared by your team, or for some reason your team isn't able to make your tools accomplish your tactical goals. Most of us are conditioned to fight on and push through, and often that is the right thing. Or you could pivot, holding on to the philosophical components of your work, but changing your tactics. Or should you bail altogether and find different tools or a new environment that sets you up better for success? So I'm going to tell three stories to illustrate these. Our first story is DHH, and we'll break it into 3 acts. DHH, our intrepid hero, ventures into the wilderness of 2004 to do battle with database-backed web applications. Tactically, he wants to ship Basecamp first and foremost, but publicity doesn't hurt. He wants to use open source to share his ideas and gather a community of people around that situation. Philosophically, he stands his ground that solving the 80% use case and building a solution that makes programmers happy are his cornerstones, so he bases his solution on Ruby. DHH waves his convention over configuration flag because we'd rather spend 2 hours realizing that we mistyped the file name of a controller, I guess, than configure XML. And he founds the church of the 80% use case. Even though it's largely considered a cult, it's granted tax-exempt status. And he's the hero we need to take down J2EE dominance and create a place for indie open source. But as soon as Rails starts getting any kind of meaningful traction, forces combine to try and stop its spread. By the way, I've got a few of these Zelda death animated GIFs, and they're pretty awesome, because you can die in Zelda the best ways. DHH is forced to realize he's swimming upstream of the norms and standards in the tech ecosystem. Crowds gather to jeer at his amateur efforts at trying to turn Ruby into a scalable platform for web development. Ha, ha, ha. And even now, it can be a struggle to convince people that Ruby still has a lot to offer. I don't remember this specific chick tract, but I believe it. Spoiler alert, DHH sticks it out. He has a lot of reasons to stick with his plan, mainly that it's working for him. He's still embracing the same philosophies and building the same tool set as 10 years ago, and he seems to have done pretty well for himself. And the church of the 80% use case still stands today. Second story, Yehuda has a similar story with a different ending. Yehuda sets out, I presume, to build software and improve the ecosystems he works in. My guess is that Yehuda's tactical goals as he sets out on his journey involve improving ecosystems, but always shipping code and building products along the way. Philosophically, Yehuda has been pretty outspoken about building the web as a platform and using communities to build shared abstractions. He starts by helping document jQuery in JavaScript land, but moves to Ruby, waging a mighty battle against the tight coupling of Rails by forging the sword of Merb. Later, all parties agree to lay down their arms and join together in harmony, and there was peace in the land. Yehuda creates a branch from the Church of the 80% use case called Our Lady of Shared Abstractions. But that didn't last forever. He did run into conflicts almost immediately. This is a fun way to die. After Rails 3, Yehuda is driven from the Rails community for his unwillingness to renounce JavaScript. But it's actually really interesting, he says as he speeds away. Keeping a lookout for what's next, he spies a project that offers a glimpse into the app-like future of the web, Sprout Core. His devotion to building a full-featured UI framework divided the Sprout Core team against themselves, and he left and renamed his project so that he could restore peace. Now, after having seen the sun rise and fall in a multitude of environments, he knows his philosophy hasn't changed, but he's learned tactical approaches to spread the word about the Church of Shared Abstractions. His philosophy stays the same, but he pivots on the technology and tools that align with his tactics at the time, from JavaScript to Ruby, back to JavaScript, Sprout Core to Ember, JavaScript to Rust, back to Ember, Ember to Glimmer, working on the TC39 working group. His philosophy, though, of using shared abstractions carried across all of these pivots. A key tenet of the Church of Shared Abstractions is that a community thrives by building during an open experimentation phase and then accepting and supporting shared solutions as a new layer of abstraction on which to build. And again, things have worked out pretty well for him as he continues to push his message. Our third story is a little closer to home, and in that it's directly and painfully my fault. I'm going to take you through a tour of our app's history and some of its code. The hero of our story is Chris Freeman, the UI lead at Ojo Labs. And spoiler alert, I'm the villain. So, in the beginning, it was peachy. Chris Freeman joined to help build a complex and ambitious consumer web application. Our tactical goals were to build a single-page web app fast, stick close to community solutions, and use technologies that look good on a resume. Philosophically, that's very true. Philosophically, Chris and I both believe that community is key, and that outside-in testing bring the best long-term results, and small teams can get leverage by building on shared abstractions. Chris's first question was why I was asking us to do this in React. And to me, it came down to the size of the React community and the fact that I wasn't sure I'd be able to get people to come do Ember professionally full-time. So we start our adventure by choosing React. Also, I love this picture because now I mostly basically play Zelda as a full-fledged cooking simulator. So if you want to catch me after this, we can swap recipes. After, let's build a framework so we can build an app. So we start with the build tooling, which used to be the biggest pain point in React. But these days, it's a lot easier. We take the tutorials, we play around, build some toy apps, and it all checks out. It's so simple and easy to learn, especially with Create React App, which is sort of inspired by Ember CLI as a starting point for bootstrapping your React apps. Create React App is cool, and within some tightly defined boundaries, you can stick with it for a while. As soon as you want to step outside those boundaries, you have to eject, meaning it does a one-time operation that freezes and copies your config files as is, and any future configuration or upgrades are up to you. That doesn't sound fun. I want to stay inside the warm, cozy cabin. Some folks are figuring out how to try to stay inside this little hut as long as possible. For me, I was hoping never to need to eject or leave. And I was willing to make it work, even if it gets a little claustrophobic. The problem is you literally can't. You can hack around it for a while, but Create React App is a bootstrapping tool and not meant to be your long-term place of residence. And there's not really a team or a track in place to make that happen. So you might want to actually get out of there. Get out. Why does the first-party command line interface become literally useless as soon as you take off the wrapping paper? So I had to do a double take. This thing looked so awesome at first, and then got weird so fast. This was a surprising moment for me. I'd hoped Create React App signified that I was still in the world where people think about the end-to-end experience. But we got our basic app config and ejected immediately before our cabin exploded. And with that, we have a simple Hello World app in just a few minutes. What could be easier? Anyone who's built a single app component in React knows the feeling of, now what? So, well, we know we're going to have links and routes and data in our single page app, so having a router seems like the logical next step. Whoa, not so fast there, Tiger. You know how when you run Rails new, the first thing you have to do is choose the router you want to use to route your app? No? Just me? It's been a while, so I can't remember. No, now you get to pick the best router for your specific needs. Isn't that great? Just kidding, we actually have to do some research first and figure out that you can't pick a router just yet, because there's a catch. Some of these routers will or won't work well, depending on which state management library we choose. That means, that's right, in order to choose our router, we get an unskippable side quest to choose our state management library. And it's not one of those fun side quests, it's the one where you have to follow somebody at the right distance without being seen for 15 minutes, and if they see you, you have to start over, and you're like, Why is this in this game? So, in order to choose a router, we need to decide how we want to manage state in our app. So the second layer of our stack will actually be managing state, not routes, which is actually a form of state management itself, but we'll get into that. And this is no small decision. Redux becomes the thing that shapes your entire app, demoting React to your view layer. A minute ago, we were building a React app. Now we have to decide if we're building a Redux app. Remember, when you're starting with React, don't use Redux. The conventional wisdom in React land says, don't use Redux until you feel enough pain from not using Redux, that the only sensible decision is using Redux. But also, when you're starting out with React, don't not use Redux, or you'll get stuck with tricky bugs. We want to stay on paved roads, and we can't even have a router until we pick one. So here now is a simplified, rough map of what I think the popular options are for these. Cool. Look, everybody uses Redux. Everybody says it's great. So even though it basically owns your app architecture from now on, we choose Redux and move on. To be fair, Redux actually is pretty cool. It's got all the cool factor and all the ergonomics of a couch made of Lego. So here was my second weird red flag. Everyone says to delay choosing Redux, except we have to choose whether we're going with Redux before we can choose a router, since the router stores the most critical application state of all, the URL in the app's history. This seems backwards to me, but we can revisit that later. We've got an app to ship. So now we need to pick a router. I want to stick to the paved roads, and we first chose the popular React router v4, even though some friends said stick with v3. But trying to combine either one of those with Redux started to cause problems that we weren't able to really solve. So we tried 3 or 4 options out and tried not to think of how ridiculous it was that we were auditioning routers. So we landed on a router designed with Redux in mind called Redux Little Router. Now we can start routing. The way you do that in React is by declaring routes as components in the root of your app rather than a separate route config file like you might expect. But once you get used to that, it's pretty straightforward. Notice what we're doing is we're rendering a versus container here instead of a component. I'll highlight that in a second. So sure enough, we go to the URL. We see the routed components rendering there. Awesome. With the routes in place, we can pass in some data and let Redux do the rest. This is our first container component. The concept isn't part of the React or Redux framework, but the React community sort of landed on the idea of using container components to handle data with template-only components to actually handle the markup and display. If that seems like we're just peeling JSX apart into controller and template layers, that's exactly right. So from here, we let Redux handle all the application state that gets handed into the component before it gets rendered. Then that container, remember, don't call it a controller, wraps this simple little component that displays some hello text and renders another component. Redux needs to bootstrap itself and be ready to resolve actions, which is just going to be a simple switch statement. Then we load all the reducers into one place so that all state changes take place in one big chunk. If you don't know what reducers are, don't worry, nobody does. This is all great. It's great for hard-coded data in our app, but we actually need to fetch stuff when we load our first route. Okay, that means we need to get data from a server, and, heaven willing, actually submit it back. That leads us to our next decision point. What do we do for accessing data from external sources? There are literally dozens of options to choose from, but here's some of the top contenders. We're going to go with Axios, which is a popular library for handling data loading from your servers. We chose it because one of our priorities is testing, and there was a decent-seeming mocking library associated with it called Moxios. Now, we've thoroughly crossed the threshold where we have any paved roads or community guidance. We're deep in the realm of where you keep searching the web but running across the same 3 blog posts over and over again, each time hoping that somehow it's magically different. So we can set up our first action, which is the only way to tell Redux that you want to push changes to the big central store. This is a very simple example in Redux where we need to define a function called getDataFromServer that loads data from the server and dispatches the result into the Redux store via the load data action. If it looks obtuse and ergonomically unfriendly, correct. You guessed right again. But once you've done the ugly bits, we can pass getDataFromServer as a property in our top-level app component. For now, just clicking a button in the top level should load some data, and it does. Loading data when a user presses a button is fine for a demo, but that's not how things work in real life. We need to load data when a user navigates to a route, submit some data, and automatically transition to success or failure states when the data succeeds or fails. That's not super simple application logic, especially when it needs to happen again and again all the way across your app. So we need to have some way to react to state changes in the app from side effects, which in Redux land actually requires a bit of finesse. This was tricky. We wanted the simplest solution we could possibly use without backing ourselves into a corner. I've seen a lot of teams get stuck here, and we were no exception. So he tried the simplest thing that could work, Redux Thunk. It seemed like the most straightforward way to do basic async things for Redux for about 1 hot minute. But I'm starting to sense, this is actual documentation, I'm starting to sense a pattern in React tools. If you have to ask, you probably don't need this, unless you do, and then you'll just know, you know? Why does every React state management library start with, when you discover the secret, the purpose of this library will reveal itself to you? So the problem with Redux Thunk is that it was becoming clear it was turning into a rat's nest of callbacks. So Freeman switched to Redux Saga because Sagas offer a lot more structure for async work. Plus, it sounds way more epic. This does seem to let us handle the side effects from every change in the route in the transition saga. We fire a router location change action from the watch router, which, if the route name matches our artisanally crafted if statement, we can asynchronously load data from the server, hold for the response, then fire another action that should, in theory, eventually let us fire off a transition to a success route. Easy peasy, mate. Even at this stage, we're creating one of hundreds of possible combinations, and quite possibly, we're the only ones with this specific combination of technologies. We're designing a framework that fits our exact needs, so why does this not feel great? After all, we have most of the things we need cobbled together to actually create a route and load its data. It's gonna have a ton of bugs to fix and some edge cases to solve, but the skeleton of the structure is there. But our confidence in this hand-rolled solution isn't there, and it's starting to get harder to make changes. Chris Freeman is an experienced dev who knows our first goal is to provide business value, and a lot of the stuff we're doing runs counter to our philosophical goals as well. For instance, we had to bail on outside-in testing, at least for now, because this setup was too hard to test at an acceptance level. So Chris wants to know why we're pursuing this track when we basically succeeded in building an untested version of a crappier Ember. I had good reasons, but my basic response was shut your pie hole. We're pretty deep into our own framework by now, and lots of presidents running for re-election know you don't change horses in midstream. So up to this point, we've been waffling, get it, between plain JavaScript objects, finding a model layer, or using something like immutable.js. Each of these has pluses and minuses, and I gotta be honest, I'm pretty tired of the whole thing by now, so let's just pick one, let's go with immutable. I've had good luck using just vanilla JavaScript objects. We use immutable.js records to create immutable models that we can pass into our Redux store and down into the UI. Now at this point, we have something we can actually use. So that's our framework, folks. End of talk. We did it, we won. It was enormously painful getting here. But for some reason, I can't help thinking we are missing something. After all, we put all this effort into this framework, and we're hoping to get actually some benefit out of that and start doing UI work. But alas, it is not to be for our hero, Chris Freeman. We can't move one more inch with confidence without tests. So finally, we're going to get into testing. We've been putting this off, but it's time to pay down some of that debt. Now, we know because Noel told us that the risks live in this mesh of complexity. So unit testing can only get you so far. We want to push for outside-in testing with acceptance tests. All right, now we're just going to pluck one of those nice off-the-shelf solutions that surely got acceptance testing in React figured out. Okay, that did not pan out. We will have to roll our own. But setting up testing in JS is its own rat's nest of fragmented dependencies. So choosing a test runner, a browser environment, virtual or real, a test framework, assertion framework, mocking library, Ajax stubbing library, all to drive an application that is one of many thousands of possible framework combinations. Now, I don't know if you've noticed yet, but we haven't even talked about building UI components yet. This is all just to get data loading into our routes at all. And even then, it's a lot more do-it-yourself than you'd expect. There's a lot of competition, but not a lot of cooperation, so a bunch of the off-the-shelf solutions are abandonware. It really did take us this long to realize how hard we were trying to swim upstream. I think we might have been doing it wrong. The React community prioritized unit testing over acceptance testing for a number of reasons, not least of which it's actually just really hard. So we grit our teeth and decide to drag the React community with us and keep swimming upstream. But sometimes, to stand and fight means you have to get down and crawl. So years ago, after adopting Ember CLI, I made many jokes about the pain of configuring Karma and assembling your own test framework for outside-in testing. But after literally weeks of failed attempts using Jest, Nightmare, JSDOM, Enzyme, and other tools, we crawl back to Karma, hat in hand, asking for forgiveness. And we're back to the land of copying, pasting karma.conf files and tweaking them until something works, or at least breaks in a more interesting way. But after a lot of effort, we get it done, have a minimum viable test framework that mostly worked most of the time. That's what you want in a test framework. Congratulations, we've created a unique, beautiful, and fragile snowflake web application, a Jenga tower of interrelated dependencies. After charting into the deepest unknown regions of space, here's our framework in all its glory. Yay, we did it, it's over, we can go home. As fun as it was to learn all this new stuff, there are real monetary time and sanity costs that come along with this hand-rolled framework. First, why is our router a mix of actual routing logic and nested if statements? Why is it so hard to have things happen on route transitions like making API requests or redirects on success and failure, showing a loading state, other common use cases like that? Second, we had a lot of problems trying to standardize data loading in a model like Layer where we could look up related data or make server calls without a lot of ceremony or manual deduplication. Lastly, our acceptance test framework was a joke. It was going to be a tremendous amount of time to maintain a bug fix when we barely had the resources to use a solution, much less invent and support one. So the third option, besides persisting and pivoting, is to back out of a situation entirely to realign yourself with a better tactical and philosophical fit. It doesn't sound very heroic, but it can be the least bad option in very bad situations. So Freeman comes back again, more forcefully this time, saying this is our last chance to rewrite the app before we can no longer deliver features anywhere near what the product team needs from us. But I actually think he wrote a halfway decent framework. But here's where Chris was feeling pain. In the React ecosystem, there doesn't seem to be a way around this idea of like hyper-local optimization every time you need to implement a feature, with little, if any, cohesion or collaboration between tools, leaving that as an exercise to the person putting them together. We were nearly 1,000 commits and 6 months into this project, though. Pressing reset and doing a full front-end rewrite seemed like a horrible, horrible idea. You know that's almost never the right call. So, to take stock of the reality of the situation, I had to revisit our original goals. Our tactical goals were to move fast, stay close to community solutions, secondarily to use tooling that looks shiny and is easy to hire for. We'd sacrificed our top tactical goals for our bottom ones, and the team was getting tired and frustrated. Not only that, we'd actually sacrificed most of our philosophical goals. We'd created a silo with crummy tests and no time left over to contribute anything back to a community. So this is the part where I cave. I decided to stop being wrong after I'd realized what we'd sacrificed to stay on this path, and it wasn't leading anywhere we wanted to go, tactically or philosophically. So midstream or not, it was time to change horses. So how do we de-risk this? So first, we gave it 72 hours to do a proof if this could work. This is my most obscure Zelda reference. If you get this, thank you so much. And it was a success. Freeman sliced off a quarter of the app and got it done in those 3 days. So we decided to dive in, he and I, and time box this upgrade to 2 weeks with a check-in after 1 week. I wanted to show more code here, but actually wasn't that interesting. What is interesting is suddenly we were able to drive out our implementations with acceptance tests, something we'd been dying to do. And astonishingly, we actually completed the upgrade inside 2 pretty long weeks with our shiny new tests, and a lot contributed to that. We did a gut check every 48 hours or so to make sure we weren't kidding ourselves. We managed it like a project with a tight deadline, and we cut scope where we could. After fighting for every inch going upstream for so long, it's hard to express how much the rewrite felt like we were just cruising downhill. Again, let's look at the graph that shows why we weren't able to bear the weight of supporting our framework and launch a product under a tight deadline. Compare that to Ember's graph. When a community establishes a set of shared abstractions, you have a bunch of people at each of these nodes. Even when things diverge, they always merge back to trunk. By periodically closing the experimentation phase and moving to shared solutions phase, you allow people to stop doing hyperlocal optimization and step back to collectively optimize the entire stack so there's a stable platform to build the next set of abstractions. This graph may also help explain why, even though the group of people using React is 10 times larger than the Ember community, the Ember ecosystem has a more cohesive community around it. So it worked out for us, but that rewrite was months later than it should happen. So how do we get there? My team tried to tell me they were experiencing pain, but I prioritized our lowest important tactical goals because I didn't think they were flexible. I'd never stepped back to really evaluate our true tactical and philosophical goals. It took me too long to realize that we were swimming upstream and that we couldn't bear the costs anymore. Once you realize you're swimming upstream, you have a few choices. You can keep up the fight, change your tactics, or change your environment. Our heroes are typically the people who persevere in the face of enormous difficulty, but that's not always the best thing. So when do you stand and fight? I think when you're swimming upstream philosophically, but you have a strong tactical reason to persist, it makes sense not to give up. Think of DHH and Rails. He had his 80% use case philosophy, but the main reason he was able to persist was because it also aligned with his shorter-term tactical goals. But be prepared. When you're trying to alter the philosophy of an entire environment, you're in for a slog. It can take a decade of persistence to change at a community level. Sometimes you need to pivot to change your approach without radically changing your environment. When you're in an environment that supports your philosophy, but you don't see your tactics being rewarded, you can pivot and try new tactics without changing anything too radical. Sandy Metz is a great example, who worked in the same place for decades in Smalltalk, then Java, then Ruby, using new tactics and new strategies while honing a philosophy that improves the way that we design software. Or Yehuda, who's found a wide variety of ways to find tactical fits for his core philosophy of shared abstractions and community. And sometimes you just need to throw the situation in the garbage when the current is carrying you away farther and faster than you can swim. When your environment has no hope of meeting your tactical goals and is an upstream philosophical battle, get the heck out of there at your earliest convenience. This can also be a clue as to when you should do that big, scary rewrite, when you realize there's never going to be a downhill slope, and there may not be a way to iterate your way to philosophical or tactical alignment. It may be time to back out and retreat to a place that offers something. And if you have high philosophical alignment and high tactical alignment, congratulations, you are not swimming upstream. Enjoy that ride. Just stay in that job, don't leave. You may not have gathered from context, but I'm not actually here to trash React. I think React is great. It's just that the ecosystem is currently not a great match for my philosophy and my top tactical goals in this situation that made it not worth sticking through. So what's my dream framework? I want someone to take a holistic approach by solving 80% of the single-page app use case, routing, models, immutable state management, simple templating, most importantly, a focus on outside-in testing. I want a tool with a strong enough trunk to support a community that shares values and solutions with each other, that cares about documentation and support, and treats testing and deployment as first-class citizens. Nice dream framework, Brandon, but aren't you basically describing Ember? And I just want to shake people building single-page apps sometimes and be like, oh my gosh, just use Ember, please. But Ember is not perfect. It can be difficult to get started with. It's got some creaky parts, since many of its foundations were built 5 years ago before JavaScript grew into a real language and before we realized something as bananas as JSX could work. It's also pretty hard to drop into existing projects. So it all depends on your goals and tactical alignment. If you're at a small startup with 1 or 2 front-end people, it's not realistic to swim upstream of an entire community and try to teach the shared abstractions philosophy or acceptance testing to the React community. Just use the thing that saves your boss $250,000 and move on with your life as a hero. But tactical alignment in Ruby is shifting for a lot of folks in the community as well. Ruby and Rails are awesome, and I believe they're wildly underestimated in the software community for their ability to save time and money by a community that shares abstractions. But there are also other goals and newer technologies to meet them. People are trying new technologies and communities and finding good tactical alignment. They're taking the philosophy they honed in Ruby to new communities like Rust, Go, Elixir, JavaScript, and more. Philosophically and tactically, the Ruby community has been an embarrassment of riches for me. From people like David Brady and Mike Moore, who welcomed me when I was a brand new programmer, to Gregory Brown's Ruby Mendicant University, there's no way I would be the programmer or the person I am today without people investing in me through community efforts. I hope you have a similar story. Our job now is to pass this on. Whether you're welcoming new people into the Ruby community or bringing some of the most valuable philosophies into another one, we're obligated to share the gifts we've been given with the next community of people that we interact with. By the way, the React story actually has a happy ending thanks to my friend and former business partner. My friend Charles Lowell, Cowboy D on Twitter, had more tactical reasons to stick this fight out and is evangelizing the idea of outside-in testing. He's developing a fully realized acceptance testing solution in React as we speak. He's ready to fight to shape the philosophy of the React community, and we need more folks like him in JavaScript land. So I encourage you to get in touch with him, to get involved, to help push this or other communities forward. There are a lot of opportunities to make a meaningful difference. I'll never be able to repay the people who helped me get where I am today, but they instilled in me a philosophy that's carried me through the toughest times in my career and my life. My hope for you is that you'll hold on to the philosophical things you've learned in the Ruby community, and you'll be able to keep that spark of gratitude alive and let it light a fire in you, and that you'll find a way to share that with others. Thanks. I'm Viking on Twitter. Thanks again to Ojo Labs for letting me come out here with y'all.